And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather again, still have a winter storm warning out for the northern panhandle, Juneau, Douglas, and areas up there for heavy snow tonight. Significant accumulations expected on top of what's already fallen. Down to the south, mixing with rain and then just plain rain. Farther to the south, areas of light snow holding but slowly ending from west to east here over the eastern Copper River Basin. Down to the North Gulf Coast, where you can see some freezing rain around Yakutat. Snow and blowing snow advances eastward across the North Slope and Arctic coast and lingers back here to the northwest coast, becomes quite light and more of a flurry condition there after midnight. Bering Sea, diminishing winds, but still dry conditions. Chance of some snow showers here for the eastern Aleutians, otherwise becoming dry for the Alaska Peninsula. Clear and cold over interior Alaska. Clear and cold tomorrow over much of the interior with pretty light winds now all the way down into the North Gulf Coast and south central Alaska. Winds really dropping off over the Bering Sea here, but conditions stay dry with most of this moisture staying to the south of even the Aleutian chain, especially the Alaska Peninsula. You could see a fair amount of clearing tomorrow. Trough exiting the eastern Arctic coast with snow ending. And Panhandle, still snow in the north, rain central and southern areas, and still some moisture for the Yakutat area that lingers into Wednesday, but more of a showery, light shower condition here, as well as the northern southeast coast. Precipitation amounts much lighter. Next push of wind and rain coming into the southern Panhandle with that system. Coastal water forecast for tomorrow, south to southeast winds 15 to 20 knots on the south coast, central coast, southeast winds 15 to 20. North coast, east winds 15 to 20 knots. Lynn Canal, south winds 20 knots, east at 15 for Stevens Passage, and then southeast winds 20 knots with 7-foot seas for Clarence Strait. And for Wednesday, Lynn Canal, light north winds at 10 knots with seas at 2 feet. Also a light northwest breeze at 10 knots for Stevens Passage. Clarence Strait, southeast at 20 knots. And for the south coast here, again with that next front approaching, small craft advisories there along Prince of Wales Island, east winds 25 knots. Central coast, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And the north coast looking at east to northeast winds at 15 knots. Cook Inlet, variable winds tomorrow for northern Cook Inlet at 10 knots, northeast 20 southern Cook Inlet, and north 30 knot winds for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. And for the western North Gulf Coast, northwest winds at 15 knots. And for the eastern North Gulf Coast, north winds 15 to 30 knots, with those 30 knot winds blowing out of the Copper River Delta. Prince William Sound, north at 25. And then those become light and variable. Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast, all having variable winds at 10 knots for the forecast Wednesday. Seas coming down still about 4 to 5 feet along the coast here. Less in Prince William Sound, pretty slight there. Light north winds, northern Cook Inlet, about 10 knots, 20 knots. Southern Cook Inlet, northwest, 20 knots. Kamishak Bay, and still small craft advisories for the Barren Islands for northwest winds at 25 knots. For the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow, we've got north to northeast winds 15 to 25 knots, northeast at 20 for Bristol Bay. Kodiak Island, north to northeast winds 30 knots with 7-foot seas. And then those really lighten up for Wednesday, north to northwest at 15 knots. Bristol Bay, northeast at 15 knots. And Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula, light variable winds at 10 knots. Bering Sea side, northeast at 15. And for the Aleutians tomorrow, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots for the entire stretch of the chain there. And for the day on Wednesday, still winds all northeast at anywhere from 15 to 25 knots. And for the southwest coast, north winds 20 knots for Tuesday, north of 20 also for Norton Sound, but just 15 knots out of the north for St. Lawrence Island, St. Matthew Island. Small craft advisories here for the Pribilof Islands, northeast winds 25 knots and seas close to 10 feet. Then on Wednesday, even lighter winds there for St. Paul and St. George, northeast at 15 knots. Light variable winds at 10 for St. Matthew Island. Yukon Delta Coast, St. Lawrence Island, northeast at 10, north at 10 for Norton Sound, and north 15 for the Kuskokwim Delta Coast. And for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, West winds 30 knots. West 25 for the central coast. West-southwest 30 knots for the western Arctic coast. And the Chukchi Sea anywhere from west to north at 25 knots. And for Wednesday, winds for the Chukchi Sea here, west at about 10 to 15 knots, 25 knot westerlies for the central and western Arctic coast, and those good brisk wind advisories continue for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast at about 30 knots.